Good morning, everybody. I'm Debbie Ario. I'm the CEO of the charity Africa Safeguarding Children. I'm also the chair of the UK BME Anti-Slavery Network, BASNET. BASNET is a part of Africa Safeguarding Children. And on the 18th of March, 2024, we released our report, The Safe House is Not Safe. And this report sheds a light on the distressing realities faced by Black and Asian survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking residing in some government-funded safe houses across England. This report it was the outcome of 2 consultative meetings we held with 13 survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking. And we held these 2 meetings in 2022 and 2023. And these 2 consultations were actually prompted by direct cases known to us at Africa. So essentially, even though we have BASNET, which is a network of charities, we also actually do direct work with survivors ourselves. So the consultations were prompted by direct cases known to us, and some of our members at BASNET as well. But aside the direct cases and that we do and that our members do, we also got complaints from survivors about their own experiences residing in safe houses provided by the National Referral Mechanism subcontractors. So we didn't just wake up and decide to have a meeting with the survivors. There were different prompts that actually led us to holding a consultative meeting. So the report documents the shared experiences of the survivors that took part in the consultative meetings. And it reveals persistent gaps in service provision, ranging from poor, unsafe, and inadequate accommodation to direct discrimination on the basis of race, linked to, for example, their sexual orientation, their gender, and nationality, ethnicity, religion, and so on and so forth. And I would like to say here as well that since we released this report, we've been contacted by other survivors of modern slavery who have shared very similar experiences as those highlighted in the report. So to enable us to have a discussion about the issues raised in the report and explore the implications for various stakeholders, charities like Africa, the survivors themselves, Home Office who manage the NRM and the Victim Care Contract, and the Salvation Army, which runs the care contract, and the various subcontractors, the Care Quality Commission, as well as many other parties in our sector. So for that reason, we're holding this important event. So this event is not a blame exercise. It is an opportunity, I guess, for us to really explore the issues in detail. So we will start today's event by presenting a report and its messages and recommendations made by the survivors who took part in the consultation. And this will be done by our policy and research manager at BASNET, Dalitso Koroma. And so she will run the presentation for about half an hour. Afterwards, we will have a Q&A session. So you can ask us questions about the report and the work that we did, and we're very happy, to respond to questions. I also know we have some survivors in the audience. So for the survivors, please, I would just like to appeal to you at this stage. If you're able to remove your video and your real name on the screen, if you wish to speak or ask any questions or make any point. And I think this would be good for confidentiality reasons. We'll then spend the rest of the session to explore the way forward, because there's no point in raising all these issues if you cannot come together and deliberate on the way forward. So what would be the best way forward? What should happen next? So we'll spend some time on that. And in relation to this specific session, what we would like to do at BASNET is to collate the ideas from this particular bit of the meeting and put it up in a note to the Home Office, so that they are aware of the recommendations from this meeting, right? So without further ado, I'm going to ask Dalis Okoroma, our Policy and Research Manager at BASNET, to present the report. Daliso, you have about half an hour.
Thank you, Debbie. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Debbie said, I will just be presenting the key emerging issues and just a summary of the report. Just a disclaimer, this is not exhaustive of the issues that the survivors presented to us. It's just a small glimpse of their experiences within the safe houses within England and Wales. So as Debbie mentioned, the purpose of the report was to explore survivors of modern slavery's experiences of racism and discrimination in some government-funded safe houses, particularly in England and Wales. Debbie has talked a little bit about our background, so I won't stress too much about it. But just in terms of the background of the consultation, coming off the back of our Race EDI action plan that was produced in July 2021, so some of you may be aware of the action plan, which was released as sort of a guide to highlight issues, and it highlighted issues in service provision for survivors, and also emphasized the need for improvement based on ethnicity, race, sexuality, and nationality. As Debbie has mentioned, we did experience several complaints through BASNET and Africa, and also with our member organizations, highlighting negative experiences of survivors and persistent gaps in the NRM subcontractor safe house provisions. So the consultations that were held were prompted by these complaints and also just prompted by our own guide around race EDI within the sector. So the purpose of the consultations was to capture the overall experiences of 13 survivors who resided across government-funded safe houses across England and Wales. And the views raised in this report that I'll be talking about today, as well as the recommendations, are just a documented summary of the experiences of those survivor participants within these consultations. Some considerations just before I continue. The names of and identities of the survivor participants and the safe houses they referenced have been completely anonymized to protect their identity, which I'm sure most of you understand as you work in the sector and the importance of protecting survivors. And to make sure that we didn't re-traumatize the survivors that took part in these consultations, we used a trauma-informed approach where survivors were offered access to counselling after the meetings, particularly those who may have been triggered by the discussions. And on top of that, something that's very key and at the heart of the work that we do at Africa and BASNET is just making sure that the cultural needs of survivors are met. So we made sure that we provided culturally appropriate food and drinks while also providing a private prayer room for participants who required it. This was mainly just to safeguard the needs of the survivors that we worked with. The expectations today, Debbie did say this is not a blame game or a moment to be pointing fingers, but more a moment to come together and figure out a way forward. So our expectations from the report was to anticipate a comprehensive review of the service delivery, monitoring the processes and policy protocols by key stakeholders, namely the Home Office, the Care Quality Commission, the Salvation Army, and the various subcontractors who provide these safe houses for survivors. And on top of that, we're aware of the overall Home Office review and design of the new modern slavery victim care contract, which is commissioned by to the Human Trafficking Foundation. And one of the things that we really want to see from this report is that the requested views expressed in this report will be considered as part of the overall review and the design of the contract. And last but not least, we also anticipate a thorough review by key stakeholders in relation to the commitment to achieving race equality, diversity, and inclusion in service provisions. So one of the things, the main things that came out from the consultations is survivors were able to share the key emerging issues that they saw and experienced within these safe houses within England and Wales. The first and most, I'd say probably stood out the most for me personally is just the fact that the safe houses are not safe, which is an understatement considering the fact that the whole point of a safe house is to make sure that survivors have a space to recover in a safe environment and in a protected and safeguarded environment. But instead, we're finding that participants reported initial hope that the safe house would provide them that safety and comfort, but instead, this was just not the case. And some of the things that were just highlighted were one survivor mentioned, when they first told me I would be taken to a shelter, I was expecting to it to be a nice and safe accommodation. That was a lived experience expert one. Another survivor mentioned, when I first went to the shelter, I was expecting to get some rest from the trauma I had experienced. And I think this is the bare minimum, if you think about it, of what should be expected from these safe houses. But I think what we just want to emphasize from this report is that it seems that we're not able to meet the bare minimum for them to recover. And secondly, was just the poor state of safe houses. Participants reported being put in accommodation that had structural defects, rat infestations, absence of health and safety and safeguarding protocols, and dirty linen and bedding. And on top of that, there were limited cooking and eating utensils. One of the lived experience experts also highlighted that when they came to the safe house, it was full of rats, lots of rubbish everywhere, no health and safety protocols, and there was no safeguarding principles or fire protocols. And on top of that, the survivor talked about during the heat wave of last summer, there was no fans. And as most of you are probably aware, the amount of funds that these survivors are given to survive and live off is very minimum. And in all honesty, considering the cost of living, it's not even enough to last a week. So to have a survivor who's looking for refuge, having to fund their own fan in a heat wave is quite shocking and distressing, in my opinion. The third emerging issue was just the limited orientation and information. Participants reported that they received little or no information prior to arriving at their safe house. Neither did they receive any orientation about the services they would expect. And I think this quote literally summarizes and puts you in the feet of the survivor themselves. And I was taken from the hospital to the safe house, and being new to this country, I did not even know what safe house was, and no one explained what was going to happen to me. I spent the entire trip assuming they were deporting me, so I sat in fear. And I think that just highlights just how re-traumatizing the experience is rather than the opposite of what it's meant to achieve. Another lived experience expert said, when they left me there, I was told a support worker would be coming every week to check on me as I was still healing from my injuries. But I was just abandoned and not given directions to the nearest shop or GP. Then I had to find my own way. And I think just even if you yourself were in a different country, it's quite unfamiliar to you. Just navigating simple things like the nearest shop is difficult. But imagine being a survivor of a trauma like modern slavery and human trafficking. And on top of that, you're healing from injuries and you're required to sort of navigate everything on your own. The fourth issue was just the limited consideration for diversity and inclusion. And I think that's one of the key things that really stood out from the participants that we supported and attended the consultations. Participants expressed dissatisfaction in the way they were treated by support workers, asserting that Asians and white survivors in the safe houses receive better treatment than Black survivors in the safe houses. This quote highlights the preferential treatment that was going on in the safe houses according to the color of people's skin. And one lived experience expert said the support workers do not necessarily take into consideration your religion. Their behavior causes enmity and jealousy between us because we Blacks are not treated well. The Asian support workers appear to favor the Asians and white people. They ignore the Black residents. The point of a support worker is to support everyone regardless of their skin, regardless of their religion, but just the consistent intersectional discrimination was a clear issue that kept coming up for all of the participants. The fifth issue was just, again, emphasizing the high levels of racism and intersectional discrimination. And I think just the fact that in a room of 13 people, 11 out of the 13 participants had experienced racism linked to another form of discrimination on their basis of their sex, nationality, ethnicity, religion, and sexual orientation. And participants also reported that they strongly believed that their negative experiences and their treatment in safe houses were directly or indirectly linked to their race, sex, nationality, ethnicity, religion, or sexual orientation. You may have noticed earlier when I was talking about the considerations of cultural inclusivity that we take very seriously at Africa and BASNET, and we did implement during our consultations. Food is one of those things that's quite comforting for anyone. And one of the survivors mentioned that when having a party, they make us eat Asian food, even though there are more Africans in the house. They don't give us any African food. And I think having the knowledge that perpetrators take the power of choice from survivors, the fact that they don't even have the choice of the food options that they eat within safe houses is particularly concerning, because that should be the bare minimum that should be offered within a safe house. On top of it, the preferential treatment and discrimination was highlighted by these two quotes. They do not help you to open bank accounts if you're not from the EU. I later found out that the head manager of the safe house had been applying for bank accounts for residents, but only those from the EU, and he would refuse to do it for residents from the Commonwealth country. That was lived experience expert 1. Another lived experience expert 4 said, the people who manage my safe house, my shelter, are Arabs, and they don't listen to Pakistanis or gay people. They take care of their own, and then we come second or don't get any help at all. Discrimination clearly was the main thing that really came up and was such a big issue. And discrimination towards LGBTQI residents was also another bigger issue. LGBTQI participants complained about staff often refusing to accommodate their needs. The participants shared that they felt isolated, and this was further compounded by the abuse, bullying, and ridicule and harassment they endured at the hands of both staff and other residents in the safe house. Considering that these survivors have been placed in the safe house to recover, it's as though they've been placed in a prison and are being treated as if they're criminals rather than the victims that they are of modern slavery and human trafficking. This quote from LAE4, who is a transgender woman, highlighted that they did the same to me, tried to put me in with 2 men when they could clearly see that I was a transgender woman. I told them I cannot stay in that room because I'm different from other men. I asked where I would hang my bra, how I would keep my things, but they seemed not to care. After an hour, they saw that I was being serious. They came and located me in my own room, which is an option from the beginning. It was still in the men's section, just that I had my own room. I think just placing somebody who identifies a transgender woman in the men's section just highlights the lack of consideration of the needs of the transgender woman. And I think accommodating the needs of survivors based on their intersectional needs is so crucial to their recovery. And this was clearly not met for the majority of LGBTQI participants that we spoke to. On top of that, there was allegations of sexual abuse and harassment. Female participants shared experiences of behaviors they felt constituted sexual harassment and sexual exploitation of residents in their safe houses. These included allegations that women in the safe houses were being propositioned for sex by the other men in the safe houses. LEE 10 said, the safe house had 3 men and 2 women. The men would always ask us for sex. LEE 1 mentioned, in my safe house, it was managed by a Romanian couple, and the lady would always call me and the other residents a certain word in her language. When we tried to speak to her for the duration of my time there, now I know it meant prostitute. I think most of you know that survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking a lot of the time experience sexual exploitation on top of the harrowing experiences that they go through. And to be placed in what's supposedly meant to be a safe house and to consistently be harassed by the men within the safe house and consistently being called a prostitute by the people that are meant to support you doesn't help anybody. But if anything, it places victim blaming where there should be safety for survivors. Mental health concerns were also brought up in that participants reported a lack of sufficient attention given by staff to residents' mental health needs. They reported staff failed to take seriously the history of trauma as they tend to downplay the experiences of modern slavery and feelings of the service users. This quote really stood out to me from LEE 5 because she said, in my shelter, I wake up every day, put on fresh clothes and put on makeup. When I complain about my room, they say I do not look depressed and I am fine. Like they know how I am on the inside. Everyone knows that depression doesn't always appear physically. Some people are functioning depressants, and that should not be, someone shouldn't have to prove their mental health in order to be supported. And their mental health shouldn't be downplayed in a place where they're meant to feel safe. And I think the thing that just highlighted the hopelessness of the safe houses that the safe houses created was just the poor complaint handling procedures. Participants reported that their complaints are not consistently followed up and they felt victimized when raising concerns. LEE 11 said, the problem is we do not complain because we do not have anyone to complain to. And LEE 2 mentioned, one night I got up to use the toilet and one of the men followed me with a knife and told me he would attack me and even hang me. When I reported the incident, they asked for evidence as if it was possible to get evidence in such a situation. They called the manager, who was British, to come, and I was happy as I thought she would surely help me. But her resolution was to call my attacker and me together to apologize and make up, even though he had threatened to take my life. I think the most disgusting thing about that quote is the fact that you would never expect a murder victim's family to sit down with a murderer. So in a situation where someone's already experienced so much trauma, to sit them down with someone that's said they'll attack them and hang them, which is clearly a triggering point of their experiences of modern slavery and human trafficking, is just very insensitive and inconsiderate. Number 10 was just the safety and security concerns. Participants reported fear for their safety due to the presence of individuals with criminal backgrounds such as drug dealing and exploitation residing in their safe houses. LEE 12 said, sometimes it's better to be in the perpetrator's house. My safe house was also used to house people who've been released from prison for trafficking, drugs, etc. We're in danger in the safe houses as they mix everyone together. They use and deal in drugs when they come out, and prostitution was also rampant. LEE 12 also said, if my perpetrators come out of prison, I'm scared they'll end up in my safe house as well. The fact that perpetrators who've committed crimes such as exploitation and trafficking are placed in what's supposedly a safe house for survivors of that same offense just doesn't make any sense and should not even be a thing that's an option or a thought. 11 was just the unprofessional attitude by support workers and staff. Participants complained about support workers not having the skills and training to provide the needed support for people who had gone through extensive traumatic experiences as victims and survivors of modern slavery. LEE 6 said something that was quite shocking in the sense of the staff running the safe house did not know what the NRM was, nor the procedure for applying for asylum when I got there. I had to ask an external support worker to help me as the staff did not know what to do, as they'd applied for an ARC card for me before applying for asylum. LEE 1 said the support workers are not trained on the job, or there's a huge gap between the training and what they do. The whole purpose of support workers and staff is to have just the bare minimum of information. And I think when you're working with modern slavery and human trafficking survivors, that bare minimum is just knowing what the NRM is. LEE 9 also said a fellow victim recently died in her room, and the staff only noticed after some days when an electrician came to do some work in her room. The staff reported to the police that she died over the weekend, but we all knew we'd not seen her for about a week, as the staff did not check on the victims, especially if you're Black. I think this quote from LEE 9 begs the question, if the electrician did not come that day, how long would that person have stayed in that room for? Number 12 was the inspection of safe houses are inadequate. Participants expressed frustration that there's usually no privacy for residents to speak their minds during the Care Quality Commission inspection visits. During such inspections, participants said that they would have preferred having such interviews outside of the premises of the safe house to give them a sense of privacy and confidentiality. LEE 8 said residents should not be put under stress by being told to speak to the CQC in the house where they could be observed by CCTV. LEE 13 also said the CQC never meet with Black residents and people who would complain. The workers always selected those who speak to the CQC. And I just want to emphasize that the quotes that we've picked today are not all the quotes that cover these points. I think another point that was highlighted is how staff would provide preferential treatment to the residents they wanted to speak to the CQC. It sounded a bit like buttering up, in my opinion, just so that it would be presented in a way that they're doing the right job. And number 13 was just the lack of standardization of services. Participants insisted not all safe houses are bad and not all staff or support workers in safe houses were unprofessional. However, the lack of standardization of services in the sector was seen as a major challenge to effective and survivor-centered service delivery for users. LEE 11 said all the contracting agents work separately and there's no standardization. It's like a lottery. You're lucky if you get put in a nice safe house with nice people running it. One of the things we also asked survivors in the consultations was also to share their recommendations based on these key emerging issues. The first recommendation was just enhanced safety and security. Participants called for improved safety measures and the careful consideration of residents' backgrounds to address concerns related to criminal activities within the safe houses. If you remember the fact that survivors are housed with perpetrators of trafficking is not a safe environment at all. And if anything, it's a re-traumatizing and dangerous environment. As another participant that I've not quoted today highlight being attacked by a criminal that lived within the safe houses. So there really needs to be serious consideration about the criminal activities and the separation of previous criminals with residents who are survivors. Number 2 was the regular audit and assessment is needed. The need for regular audits and assessments to ensure the consistent delivery of high quality services was highlighted. Promoting accountability and transparency. There should be a safe house for survivors of trafficking to engage, safe place to engage with the CQC and other inspections in a way that protects their privacy and confidentiality. And I think this just highlights the importance of speaking to the people who these services are for, and not just selecting people that you think would butter up or say the right thing. Because how else are we meant to provide high quality services if we're not actually given the space for all survivors, regardless of their skin, sexuality, or any other intersectional characteristic of theirs? Number 3 was cultural inclusivity. Participants emphasized the need for a more culturally sensitive approach in the operation of safe houses, including tailored services that respect diverse backgrounds and traditions, and mandatory training for staff focusing on cultural sensitivity, equality, and diversity. I think a quote that I've not quoted is just how one of the participants who was gay highlighted that he was placed in housing with other people from his country, knowing full if there was cultural inclusivity and sensitivity, there would have been an understanding that that wasn't necessarily a safe environment for him. As in some African countries, being gay is seen as a taboo and a crime. So most of these survivors are leaving those countries for safety. But if you're placing them in supposed safe houses with people that will bully them, as I mentioned earlier, it's not necessarily a safe house. And on top of that, just thinking about diverse backgrounds, it goes further than just providing the necessary foods, but also thinking about if you're accommodating people for their religious purposes, whether that's Ramadan, consider other religions that are also in the house and accommodate all people based on their needs. Number 4 was the survivors' entitlements. Clear communication of residents' entitlements under the national referral mechanism was requested to ensure transparency and understanding of available support services. Most of these survivors are new to this country. They don't know the systems of this country. And if being placed in a safe house with support workers, they're not able to even be given the bare minimum of information which really matters to them, which is the process of the national referral mechanism and other available support, then we're failing them. 5 was trauma-informed care and support, which I honestly think shouldn't have to be a thing that we have to do or say. It should just be a given. Participants stressed the importance of prioritizing mental health support, urging for specialized services that address the unique challenges faced by survivors. 6 was mandatory training. Support workers should undergo mandatory and standardized training on cultural intelligence, race equality, diversity, and inclusion to ensure that they can effectively assist survivors and address their diverse needs. 7 was review complaints procedures. A robust mechanism for residents to lodge complaints and provide feedback was recommended to ensure accountability and continuous improvement in service delivery. The quote that was said by one of the lived experience experts should really stick in most of our heads, which was, "We don't complain anymore because we don't know where to complain." The fact that most of these survivors don't even feel like they have a platform to complain means that we're placing them in supposed safe houses where their voices are taken away rather than empowering them. 8 was vigorous scientific investigation. We recommend a much more detailed and scientific investigation on the issues raised here. This, as much as the sample size is only 13, if we think about the number of safe houses that are out there, we have 30 safe houses across England and Wales. If each survivor represents at least one of 13, that's a lot of survivors that are representing so many people within these safe houses. So I think more investigation needs to be done just to find out how bad the situation is and how best we can support everybody, because these recommendations and issues do not represent the bare minimum of the issues that these survivors are going through. That's the summary of the report. But just for the next part of the briefing, we're just going to have a Q&A. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the chat section or feel free to speak up and raise your hand, and then me and Debbie will be able to answer the questions.
Good morning, everyone. And first of all, thank you so much for the report. I certainly had sight of it, and I also responded in writing, to this report. I think the important thing for everyone, whether we're stakeholders or service provider, is not to be oversensitive about the report, because, the declaration is that it was a sample of 13 individuals over a period of time. And this might even be an important one, as Debbie said, to look at a bigger picture of what's going on. And I think the other thing is also we have a responsibility to listen, to those affected, even if it's one person. It means that, we need to listen. I think that, for me, I would recommend that we focus on the way forward and what we can do next. Proactively, what we can do proactively next. And I think that, let me just also say that for this particular report, for the first time, it also mentioned the impact on people who are LGBT. And I think this is a very rare occasion, and I'm really grateful for that. And the reason I'm grateful is because, there are communities who are fleeing persecution, who are fleeing for the fear of their life, and then end up in services that compound those fear for them. And I think that the other issue also is to look at the issue of race. This is really services here in the United Kingdom where we're still dealing with racism in services. That is not acceptable. And we're also seeing the racism goes into different communities as well. There are reports about, Arabian managers, Romanian managers who are ostracizing Black people. Now, these are serious matters that needs to be looked into. For anyone that is looking to defend their organization, here is an opportunity to work. I don't think that, there's a sense of acrimony behind the report. It's actually to raise issues. And I truly believe that, we have a great opportunity to address this, in a way that will continue to support the work that all the different organizations are doing. Now, again, just to reiterate, I believe these are samples. Not every, safe house organization were investigated or reports have come from them. But I would say let's look at what we can do next, including the stakeholders, including safe house professionals, and indeed for the safety of all communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Reverend Jide. That was very, very helpful. And just to highlight as well, there are some survivors in the chat box just talking about their experiences. I'm really pleased to hear, to see, some people who have the lived experience of this issue, so making that comment in the chat box. And that goes to show that this is not something that we made up. These are real concerns being highlighted by people who are affected by it. I'm not affected by it. I'm not a survivor of modern slavery. The people who have the lived experience are saying to us in our sector that the services that we're providing are inadequate and they want something to be done about it. And I think That really is important. We can see that many survivors are in the chat box. They're not very happy. So you know, that's the evidence you need. What needs to change? Does anybody want to make any comment on that? Robin?
Hi, Debbie. Thanks very much for putting this event on today, and for doing the research. I've got a couple of observations, and some of the things that are being said, whichever side of the fence you're on, I can see the points that many people are making here. Just to kind of set the scene is that we have just done a piece of research on cultural competency. I represented West Midlands Anti-Slavery Network. We included Cleveland, North Wales, Birmingham, and the North East. And we did that with Shiva Foundation and Hull University. That's soon to be published. We did that research under MS Peck. Some of the findings within the report are not dissimilar to what you're speaking about here. And one of the kind of key factors that came out in that is training around cultural competency. We first saw that in West Midlands. We run a safe house for male victims of trafficking, but that's pre-NRM. That's at the point of rescue. What we've seen over the years, and it is relevant to this in some way, what we've seen over the years is that the victims that we used to see when we first set up some years ago are very different to the victims we see now. We're seeing far more mental health, far more drink, alcohol problems, drug problems, and the nationalities and cultures and faiths of the people have changed as well. So during a couple of conversations here, you know, I was wondering, and this is definitely no disrespect to Anne-Marie and her team, is that I think when the NRM was first set up many years ago, the reason it was set up and the people that they expected to be the service users, I think that has changed over the years. And it makes me wonder if that has kept pace, because certainly people that we see for a very short period of time with mental health, drink, drug abuse, different faiths, different cultures, they're only with us a short time. And then they go on to the NRM or into safe houses and into the victim care contract. Some do. You know, I could go off and talk about no recourse public funds, but I won't. That's not relevant here. But one of the things I was thinking about, taking all those things into account, Debbie, I wonder what you think are next steps here, because although we're having this event online today, it really does sound as though there is a group of people that need to get together and go through this in detail. You know, some of the findings, quite frankly, are shocking. But it sounds like there needs to be a group of people, which probably should include the Home Office, Salvation Army, subcontractors, yourselves, researchers, lived experience, most importantly, is sit down and say, right, what are we going to do? You know, there's potentially many issues which include training, which include salaries, which include staff turnover, retention of staff, recruitment of staff, skills and experiences of staff when we recruit them. But you know, some of those things are linked, I think. So I'd be really interested in next steps, and you know, we would be happy to be part of that if there is a role for us to play in the future.
Thank you, Robin. Actually, that's a very excellent point. Like I said earlier, we invited the Home Office to this meeting alongside the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, and the Home Office declined to come. It would have been nice to have them here because, again, like I said, this is not an attempt to blame anybody. Every single person who works in our sector, we are all here because of the survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking. If there were no survivors of modern slavery and human trafficking, none of us will have a job here. We will be working somewhere else, or we'll be jobless, right? So it is in our best interest, as well as in the best interest of the survivors, to make sure that the services that we provide for them are adequate, and that everything that's necessary, that's needed to make that happen, happens. We can't do this without the key players, the Home Office, Salvation Army. And so it's essential, like you said. I will write again to the Home Office after this meeting. I will inform them of the issues that came up, and I'll also ask for another meeting. But this time around, I'll ask for, you know, a much more bigger meeting with other key players, those who might want to come. This is not a blame game at all. But if we do not improve on all these issues, if we don't make an attempt to improve, at some point, things will come to a head. and it will really, it wouldn't be nice for all of us. So people have gone through a lot. People have suffered because they've been in safe houses. I know of one particular case of somebody who tried to kill herself 4 times in a safe house, and this person was okay before they went into the safe house. There are many stories like that. And so if we don't improve, things will happen that will not be in the best interest of all of us. So on that note, I want to say thank you to everybody who took the time to join us, especially the survivors who were brave enough to put their comments in the chat box, or who were brave enough to actually speak out about their experiences. We're not going to stop here. It's not a blame game, but we cannot not act on this because these are very important issues. People's lives are involved. We're going to write to the Home Office, like I said, and if anything comes up, for everybody who came to this meeting, we will inform you so you can be aware or you can be able to take part if necessary. So on that note, I want to say thanks to everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.